Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you've all are aware, I've made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And they were kind enough to designate each one of us a pilgrim to Israel. Gave us a handy-dandy little certificate that goes along with it as a remembrance. But we all gathered together on January the 13th on a Monday, and I was flying out of Columbus. So Judy takes me down to Columbus, drops me off. I go in, I find my gate, and I'm sitting there, and I notice these two ladies sitting over the ways a little bit. One of them gets up, walks away, and when she comes back, she stops and she said, "Would your name be Mike May by any chance?" Yeah. "Oh, my name is Becky, and we're going on the trip with you." And I said, "Oh, okay. I thought I was the only one from Columbus." So we board the plane. I find my seat. I sit down, and the gentleman next to me turns and says, "Would your name be Mike?" "Did they post my picture on the internet?" And he said, "Oh, no, we all got an email, and it has a listing of everybody on the trip and what seats they're on." Oh, I didn't get that email. Apparently when they entered the emails, they had one digit wrong on my email address, and hence I didn't get it. But this thing has an echo to it. Can this go down just a little bit? So we made our way to Newark, New Jersey. We boarded a plane and flew overnight to Israel, and we arrived to, oops, wrong button. There we go. We arrived in Israel at 9:20 a.m. on Tuesday morning. It would have been 2 o'clock in the morning here. There's a 7-hour time difference. Gathered up all of our luggage. Didn't lose anybody en route. We met our guide, Rabia, a Palestinian Christian, and boarded our bus and took off for Tiberias. And along the way, we stopped. We stopped at the Mediterranean Sea and took a look at some of the ruins of the aqueducts that were built by Herod the Great back in before Jesus' time, before we went on to Tiberias. So we checked into the hotel along the side of the Sea of Galilee. We have our supper, we have a meet and greet, and we decide we've been up all night, we're going to bed. And we did, and we had a opportunity to get up the next morning to a sunrise over the Sea of Galilee. It wasn't a real bright sunrise, but a little bit overcast, and then another shot of that view from another area of the hotel. So we had a kosher breakfast, and it's interesting. All of our meals on breakfast and supper were kosher. So in the morning you would have dairy products, except you did not have any pork in any way, shape, or form. There was a lot of grumbling over that by the end of the 10 days. And then supper, there was no dairy. I don't fully understand kosher menus, but it was all good. So we headed up for Caesarea Philippi. And along the way, you know, traveling up the mountain, we saw some views of the Sea of Galilee. For some reason, I was infatuated by the Sea of Galilee. I probably have about 40 pictures that look just like that. But along the way, we got to see Mount Hermon with the snow-capped mountains. They said the snow up there was probably 3 feet deep, and hence the water would come to feed the Jordan River coming from Mount Hermon. But it's interesting to note that in Jesus' day, this trip would have taken them roughly 2 days to make on foot from Tiberias down along the Sea of Galilee up to Caesarea Philippi. The average person can walk something like 15 to 20 kilometers a day, which equals out to about 9.5 to just under 13 miles. And Rabia told us that about every 15 kilometers, you'd find an inn or a hostel or something like that where people could stop when they were traveling. You know, they didn't have the option of the bus, and jump in it, and an hour and a half later you're there. Plus the roads weren't in the same condition they are now. But there's no indication to us that Jesus ever used them. In fact, Scripture tells us that he had no place to lay his head. So there's no indication to us that he ever used those. So we get to Caesarea Philippi, and we gathered for our first lesson in an area where Jesus would likely have sat and taught his disciples. And Dwayne Carson, Pastor Carson, gave us a lesson while we were there from Matthew 16, verses 13 and following. And it's here at Caesarea Philippi that Jesus makes two statements that blows the minds of his disciples. The first one was, Jesus says, "Who do men say that I am?" And their response is paraphrased by me here. He says, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah or Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. But Jesus pointedly asked him a question again, but who do you say that I am? And it's here where Peter made his great confession that he said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus goes on to say to Peter is blessed because only the Father could have revealed that to him. And he goes on to say, and I also say unto you that you are Peter, and on this rock or upon your faith I will build my church. And the word church from the Greek is translated to called out. And Pastor Carson pointed out that this is the first time that we hear the word church in the New Testament. Keep in mind that the disciples, they're still in kingdom mode. You know, they think Jesus, while he's the Messiah, is going to come, he's going to overthrow Rome, and they are going to establish the Jewish kingdom again. So he says, I'm going to establish my church. And they're going, church? What's a church? And he goes on to say that he follows it up with, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And I don't know about you, but in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, hell's not going to be able to tear down the church. But in this setting, at Caesarea Philippi, there is the sanctuary of Pan there and the temple of Zeus there. Had no clue that sanctuary of Pan, temple of Zeus, was even in Israel in the first place. But notice this little area right back here. That's a cave, very large cave. And they believed that that cave was the gates to Hades. And I'm like, wait, what? Pan's supposed to be this half man, half goat thing running around Greece, not in Israel. And I think every time I sit down to look at this, I go back to, what? You know, you've seen the TV commercial where they go, yeah, I was like that for 10 days. You know, I never claimed to be a great scholar and made the connection to the temples and sanctuaries being in existence in Israel in Jesus' day. But, you know, I always thought that the dirt houses and the ones you see in your Bible stories and the flat roofs and maybe the Jerusalem and the temple, that was all built, but never in my wildest imagination was I prepared to see the things that I saw in Israel. Why did that not change? Did we disconnect it again? There we go. There's are the ruins of the Temple of Pan and the Temple of Zeus, all that remains today. And then we have the I think I'm disconnected, possibly. Hold on here 1 second. Yep. Told you, technology hates me. I guess I got to turn it on. Okay, I'm disconnected. I think we're back. Yay. Or not. There we go. All right. But there's the ruins of the temple. And those are the springs of Hermon. It's the headwaters of the Jordan River. The second statement, I mentioned the first statement, upon this rock or your faith, I will build my church. The next statement he makes to him is, we're going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to suffer and die and rise again. And I can just picture the disciples going, what? You're supposed to be the king. You're supposed to overthrow the Romans. And we go along that path. I'm sure they secretly harbored those questions. How can these things be? We left there and we went down along the Sea of Galilee again. We went to the place where the Sermon on the Mount was preached, up on a hillside looking down over into the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus, in preaching his Sermon on the Mount, he began with the Beatitudes, 8 of them, and then he went on through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus, on the Sermon on the Mount, gave a different way of living. He gave an example of the law. For example, he'd say, you've heard it said, you shall not murder. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother. So he expanded on the law. And after the lesson, we walked down to the Church of the Beatitudes. It's a church, 8-sided, octagon-shaped. Same inside, there's just a hallway around the inside, and each of the Beatitudes is listed there. And of course, a nice little offering basket at each station so you can put money in. And while I was standing there, I looked down and I went, no, can't be. So I take a picture of it, which I didn't share here, but there in the offering basket on one of the Beatitudes was Romanian money. And I'm going, No, someone's playing a joke. So we got to view that, and we looked at the scene, and then we walked on down to an area along the Sea of Galilee, just a short distance away. And they call it the Primacy of Peter. And this might have been the area, somewhere in the general area where the 5,000 were fed. This also where Peter is restored. In John 21, following the resurrection, the disciples have returned to Galilee, and they've been out fishing all night. You know the story. They hadn't caught anything. They're frustrated. And then they see this guy on the shore, and he says, "Children, do you have anything to eat?" And they said, "No." "Well, cast your net out on the other side." And they're going, "Really?" But then one of them recognizes that it's the Lord, so because you say so, we throw it out, and they catch this great multitude of fish. And along in that story, Peter jumps out of the boat, swims to shore. The others get to drag the fish in. And when they get there, Jesus already has a fire going and fish on the fire. Where did they come from? They didn't bring them in from the boat because they still haven't brought the fish in. But a little bit later, verse 11, it tells us they caught 153 fish. And I've never put any significance onto that. Yeah, okay, they caught 153 fish. I've never caught 153 fish at one time, but this was apparently significant. And the significance of it is in the Hebrew language, their alphabet, there's a numbers relate to the letters. And the 153 would translate out, "I am God." And I'm going, whoa. Another purple cloud. So, and then Jesus invites them to come and eat. And he breaks bread and he gives it to them, and he cuts up the fish and gives that to them. And another interesting fact of the Hebrew culture that I learned is if a Jewish person has any bitterness towards you, he will not invite you to sit down and eat. And Jesus said, "Come and eat." And he shared with them. And it was there that Peter was restored. You know, we know the story. "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Then feed my sheep." "Peter, do you really love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know I do. Tend my sheep." And then he repeats it again, "To feed my sheep." And that's there along I guess it'd be about the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Picture there of Pastor Carson and myself, and then another one of just me, just standing there along the water. They told us, "Oh, go ahead and test the water." "No, I think I'll pass. You'll see why later on." Truly, holy ground, or at least we felt. Not only did I see in the offering plate the Romanian money, but there's another group ahead of us here at the holy ground, and there's some guy sitting there holding a flag it's Romania's country flag. I'm going, whoa. How odd is that? That's pretty neat. So we leave there, and of course, we went down to Capernaum, the home of Peter's mother-in-law. And the only thing there right now is the synagogue. I guess that's not real good of a picture, but it's the synagogue there in Capernaum. And it's here that also you'll see the ruins. Note that the stones here in this particular shot, the old synagogue, they look black, and they are. And the new synagogue, which is also in ruins, is out of white stone. And the black stone is native to Israel. And it's because of volcanic activity whenever. And it's everywhere. I mean, everywhere. And so they used what was available, and they would build with this black stone. Anytime you see the white stone, it was stone that had been brought in from someplace else to use in construction. They've built a chapel of sorts above the ruins of Peter's mother-in-law's home. Remember the story when the four friends lowered the paralytic down through the roof? Well, this was supposed to be Peter's mother-in-law's home. She was probably not too happy they tore up her roof, and now her house is in ruins. So they built a chapel over it. No, not really. But it's interesting to note that there was 3 cities. In Matthew 11, beginning in verse 20, Jesus said, "Then he began to rebuke the cities in which most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! And you, Capernaum, who are exalted in heaven, will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day." All 3 of those cities, Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, are uninhabited and stand in ruins today. We just bounced off again. You gotta love technology. Guess you got to hit the right button. There we go. Of course, you got to eat. So, there we go. We got on the bus and left the primacy of Peter and went down to St. Peter's restaurant. Walked down the hill, down along the sea there, and we had, of all things, St. Peter's fish. They actually call it St. Peter's fish. Apparently it's native to the Sea of Galilee. You could have the fish whole, or you could have it filleted. I had the fillet. That's somebody else's meal I took a picture of. Excuse me. And then fresh dates, which were really quite good. And then we went around to the west side of the Sea of Galilee and boarded a boat for a cruise on the sea. They told us most people get on the boats on the east side, but for whatever the reason, they decided to take us to the west side. And that's a picture, a likeness of the boat. It's not a little tiny thing. It's pretty good size. We were all on it with plenty of room. And Pastor Carson there giving us some instruction, and then the rest of us just kind of observing. We had some scripture read and some songs said or sung, and taking a look out over the ocean. Pastor Carson said he had been praying all day for a storm. It did not come on that day. In a way, I was hoping that we would get into that storm and get that experience, but it didn't happen. Just another picture. And then the captain of the boat wanted to, he thought he was going to teach us a Hebrew dance. You know, Abba Nagila. Abba Nagila. Yeah, you don't try to teach a bunch of old people how to do that. He even said, "You Americans are terrible." Well, you didn't give us time to practice. There is coming up a representation. That little blue thing in the distance is actually the size of the fishing boats we saw several people going out in that day as we came into shore. They gave us a little affirmation and a present from the Sea of Galilee that we had walked to that day on the same places where Jesus had walked 2,000 years ago. That was pretty cool. And So the next day, that was the end of that day. The next day we went to, on Thursday we went through Cana, stopped at Nazareth, went to Megiddo, Caesarea, and Mount Carmel. It was a full day. A little bit of scenery along the way, going through to pick up Rabia, who lives in Cana, from Tiberias. It's not going to change, I don't think. Is it just running slow, Jim, or?
I think it might be. Try changing.
There we go. A little more scenery. You'll notice the rocks I talked about. There's rocks like that in all the fields. They have to clear the rocks if they're going to try and crop or plant anything. And so they have to, as part of it, they say it's the African Syria Rift, where a glacier had moved down through that area the length of Israel, and it created this large valley and deposited all these rocks. So I'm going to pull this up here. Maybe that's part of the problem. So there's a shepherd's cave, or one of the caves up there from that day that's still around, assuming that shepherds still use them. The one thing that was a little bit disappointing was we missed the sale to Kia at Nazareth that day. It was on January the 8th, and we weren't there till like the 17th, so we kept on going to Nazareth, and that's the church, the Orthodox church there in Nazareth. Can't ever say that. They still have things up for Christmas that late in January. Of course, there are some people coming for the 75th anniversary celebration of the freeing of the Holocaust victims coming up later that week, so they were leaving everything up. So inside, you get down into this, and this is where they believe that the angel spoke to Mary and telling her that she would have a child. And his name would be Jesus. And the icon, they're big on icons. There's the angel, there's God, and that's their icon to show that she was with a child and his name was Jesus. Also have Mary's Well. And all these churches were built, all these sacred places were built in areas where there was a water source. We all know how important that is. Nazareth was a crossroads, commercial crossroads. They likened it to today, the culture in Nazareth, to be like that of Las Vegas, you know, a sin city, so to speak. And it prompted Nathaniel in John 1:46 say, "Can anything good come from there?" Meaning Nazareth. So they then built, because the church was up on a hill, they built this structure down in the town that had 4 little spigots, and they plumbed water to it so the villagers could come and get water and not have to go up to the church. From there we went to Megiddo, and it's up on top of a really high hill, walled city, and they're starting to restore it. And it overlooks the Jezreel Valley, or the Valley of Armageddon. And I tried and tried and tried to take pictures of the Jezreel Valley. And it is so big that you just can't get a good picture of it. I even tried to do a video, and you can't get it all. It's like 220 square miles. This is where the Battle of Armageddon is supposed to take place, where the Bible tells us that the blood will reach to the bridles of the horses, And I'm looking out over that valley going, that is a lot of blood. But different cultures over a period of time had built structures up here on the top of Megiddo. This is a sanctuary, and what they found is they were excavating it as they'd find a sanctuary, a place of worship, and they go down a little bit further and they find the next cultures, and they found several layers of where they kept building sanctuaries in the same spot. And they had their own water system. You know, if they were under siege, you know, people, they just blockade you off, and you had to have water and food sometime. So they dug down to the water. And then there's a cave that went out into the valley where they blocked it all up. And they had this water that they could stay there indefinitely. And there you see Pastor Hicks and Pastor Carson on a chariot. This particular one, it was one of the cities that Solomon had of his horsemen and his chariots. 2 Chronicles 1 says, and Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. You had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen whom he stationed in the chariot cities with the king in Jerusalem. And they told us that people thought that was foolishness. He didn't have that many horses, or horsemen, or chariots. It's not possible. Until they did the excavation here at Megiddo, and they found the huge stables and whatnot there. There's another shot of the Jezreel Valley. And we went from there to Caesarea National Park. Caesarea is a commercial city, or was a commercial city with a deep water port. And again, it was built by Herod the Great. He was crazier than a loon, but he was an architect and a half. A lot of the structures were built in this time were under his guidance. And here at Caesarea, it includes not only the deep water port that you can see behind me, it had a Colosseum and a hippodrome. And there's another shot of the Colosseum. But there was a big wall along the back where you see all that blue. So they'd stand on the stage and they'd have their programs and whatnot. So we had a lesson there, acted out a portion of Acts, a hippodrome where they did the chariot races, which is kind of cool. And the port, just a little bit, some more rocks we saw on our way to Mount Carmel. And Mount Carmel, you'll remember, is where Elijah took on, if you will, the priest of Baal. Go ahead. Let's see if you can call down fire. And they tried and failed, as we know. And it's recorded in 1 Kings 18. But what was interesting to me is, if you'll remember in that story, Elijah told him to go out and get 12 barrels of water and pour on this sacrifice that he had there. Had a ditch dug around it and poured all this water on. And it was really a sacrifice for them to do that because it was during a time of famine and during a time of drought. And 12 barrels of water was a lot of water that they couldn't afford to lose. But it was a sacrifice for them, and the significance of that was there. And of course, fire came down and consumed the sacrifice. There's a church there with an observation post. We went up on the roof and looked out over the valley again. That's a little bit better picture of how big the valley is from the mountain we're on, clear of Mount Carmel, clear over. I think you can see Mount Hermon in the background going the other direction. But it was kind of neat on that roof. They had this, in the center of the roof, they had this circle and lines drawing off, and you can see the the signs on the wall, and it would tell you what you could see in the distance, and you could just go in a big circle and see for miles and miles. So again, I'm looking at that like, what? And it was cold that day. It was blowing up there, and you notice I don't have a hat on because I think it got blown off. But we finished with a service in that little chapel, and went back to the hotel that night. Next morning we get up and we are going to Magdala and Jericho. There's Magdala. They pulled into the parking lot, says, this is Magdala. This is where Mary Magdalene came from. We don't have time to stop and look at it, so we're going to go. And we pulled back out of the parking lot and went to Jericho. Well, see you, Mary. So we go to Yardenit, the baptismal site on the Jordan River. And again, there's a group of 32. I think there was 9 of us decided to be baptized. I don't know what was so funny there, but Pastor Hicks brought a very short devotional on baptism. And there's those of us. What's interesting is I think it's the 2 young girls were being baptized, their believer baptism, their very first baptism. The rest of us were being baptized for different reasons. Mine was, it's on the bucket list, and I was there and probably would never get a chance to go back. So I wanted to experience baptism in the Jordan. And let me remind you, it is winter in Jordan, and it was cold. So we go into the water. I'm baptized. And what was really great and really amazing, as we were finishing the baptism, a dove flew down and landed right in the area of where we were being baptized. How cool is that? Well, it was actually a pigeon, and it was black. But the significance was there, I actually didn't notice it. I think I was suffering from hypothermia at the time and was getting in a warm shower, but one of the sisters shared this with us. That gentleman standing next to me, we're there along the Jordan River. His name is Ken Newsom of Advance, North Carolina. And he was my roommate for 10 days, and we had a good time together. We went from there, we got on the bus and went to Bet Shean. It's another one of those, I guess, Roman cities. This is the arch going from here going into the Colosseum. I just thought the light effect was cool. But here's another one of those Colosseums that held 7,000 people. I'm like, I didn't know there was 7,000 people in Israel, but you ever wondered how they moved those rocks? You saw in the movie Moses how they kept throwing logs down and these slaves were pulling it. Well, this is actually how they moved rock. It was 2 big wheels, and they were able to cut holes in the side of the big blocks of stone, and they were able to roll it pretty much into place. I thought, well, that was pretty amazing. They were way ahead of their time as far as architecture and engineering. And you can see the stage there, and you can see we were sitting right about in there, and somebody else was down here, and Pastor Carson says, "Give us a word." And the person speaking down on the stage in a normal tone could be heard clearly where we were sitting up at the top. In fact, you could snap your fingers, which I can't do anymore. You could snap his fingers and you could hear it up there on the stage. And it just blows my mind. There's some more of the ruins of that city. What's interesting is that was all buried. My understanding was, and some guy's out there trying to plow, and he hits the top of one of those things. So they started digging, and they kept finding more and more and more, and they finally unearthed this whole area. So we go back, start out. We've gone up. We've transitioned now a couple of days ago from Tiberias to Jerusalem, and we get up on Saturday morning, and it's cool and it's light rain on and off that day, and it's the day that we're going to walk the city of Jerusalem. And so they dropped us off, and we walk around the old city, and they point out the Mount of Olives across the way from Jerusalem there, or from the city. And we entered by way of the Lion Gate. You see the little lions on there. Now understand too that in 70 AD that Jerusalem was completely destroyed. No rock standing on top of another one, and somewhere along the line, probably during the Crusades, they started building this thing back up again. There's 4 quarters in Jerusalem. There's the Palestinian quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Armenian quarter, and I don't remember the 4th one. Might be the Catholic quarter. But at any rate, there's 4 quarters of the city. And so our first stop was at the Pool of Bethesda, where the water would shimmer, and if you got into it first, you got healed. That's all that's left of that. But one of the cool things on that trip was St. Anne's Church. Now, groups would go in there, and you'll see a group of people standing up there. That's the altar area. And we had a turn. And if you'll turn that blue mic live, there is the acoustics in this is pretty amazing. Listen for just a moment. Listen for the echo. What's really cool is when someone stands there and sings the Hallelujah, and it just echoes. There was one group after us that went in and they'd sing, and they were singing Amazing Grace. And they'd sing, Amazing Grace. And they'd listen for the echo, and they went through that for the whole thing. So we leave there, and we walk the Via Dolorosa, the Stations of the Cross. There's 14 Stations of the Cross, about of which 5 are biblical. They add along the way, second and third time that Jesus fell, and those sort of things. But along the way, we walk that, and the city is crowded, and we also learned that there's apparently Buckeye fans in Israel. Sorry, Kentucky, I didn't see one for you. But we walked the city, and we went to the different places, and we saw the largest synagogue in in Jerusalem and the giant menorah that they have out encased in glass. And then we went to the Western Wall. Some people call it the Wailing Wall. And you'll notice that they stand there and they do the rocking as they pray, the Hasidic Jews with the little curl. So we had opportunity to go down to there. Standing up on top, you can take pictures, but you cannot take pictures down on the ground. So to go down there, we all had to put on our little cap and go down and pray at the Wailing Wall, and we did take opportunity of that. They tell us that underneath that wall is buried all the elements needed for the sacrifice. The lampstands, the incense burners, all those things are buried there. And there are some who even claim that the Ark of the Covenant is down there as well. And then whenever they build the temple, when they get control of that and tear it down and build the new temple, they'll be ready to go. Everything will be in place. But as they rock, they're wailing because they're not able to do the sacrifice anymore. That's part of the significance of that. But that's the Dome of the Rock in the background there. The Muslims control that. There's limited access to it. We didn't go into it that day. It's a site. When you see another picture here in a moment, is where the Holy of Holies was in the Jerusalem temple. Underneath in there, that rock, the Jews believe that that's the rock where Abram took Isaac to be sacrificed and a lamb was provided. There are even some who say, well, Adam and Eve were created there and then God moved them to the Garden of Eden. The Muslims, however, say, well, it wasn't Isaac that was going to be sacrificed there, it was Ishmael. We'll stick with Isaac. They also believe that that's where Muhammad was swept away on a large bird into heaven. So everybody wants control of that, and nobody wants to give it up. And you and I, as Christians, don't have to worry about if they have it or not. The Zion Gate, as we were getting ready to exit, you can't see it real well, but the Zion Gate, coming from the outside, you enter over here. But then you have to 90 degree and come in this way. And that taxi cab, as little as it was, pulled in, had to back up, turn, and they designed that way. They didn't have a physical gate over it, but the cavalry or whatever couldn't come charging right into your secure area or your walled in area. They had to work at it. We went from there to the side of the Last Supper, the upper room. And that's a pretty cool thing to observe. But again, this particular building, this room, was built during the Crusades because the temple, of course, had been destroyed. So the Crusaders had built that, and there's a lot of symbolism from that era in there. We had, a devotional there as well. And then we went down to King David's tomb. And again, no pictures were allowed, no cameras. A lot of men were in there instructing young boys and young men, reading and teaching them from the Hebrew Scriptures. So Sunday, we went to Jericho. It was pretty cool. We also went to Qumran. We went to the Dead Sea, to Bethlehem, and Shepherd's Field. Our first stop was Shepherd's Field. And we went out there, and if you'll notice that building, the walls are kind of sloped. There's that big dome with the holes in it and an angel on the front. The sloped walls are to kind of be significant of a tent. The dome, the stars in the sky, and of course the angel. And a group of us there, Rabia and Pastor Carson and myself and Kim. Inside the church is this mural of the Nativity, and then there's another one of the shepherds. And we had a really nice lesson there, the Christmas story, essentially, as we as we worshiped there on Sunday morning. And then we went down a little ways into what they called Shepherd's Cave. And we went inside and sat down and continued with our lesson. Back in the far corner, there's a nativity set up, and I guess the implication is this was where the shepherds would take shelter in inclement weather. So we left there and we went to Jericho, and there you see Temptation Mountain. And I know you've heard about it, but there's our group, the entire group together. Courtney had to Photoshop herself in because she wouldn't trust her camera to anybody else, but Temptation Mountain there, our entire group, and you've heard about the camel ride. It's all a sham, I didn't write it. No. Actually, I did. There I am climbing on. That's how you get on. I'm trying to think they had a stirrup there that you could, just like you get on a horse in the saddle, but then they pulled the stirrup away. And it was interesting when he ordered the thing up, because hang on. And then off we go. There's the Temptation Gallery in the background. And so we made the trip. Yeehaw. We went from there to Qumran, and that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And kind of a neat thing, there's one of the caves. A lot of that is I'm thinking, how did they get this? How did the shepherd throw a rock in that hole? Well, there's a big hole in front of it, and it's eroded away after all the years. But excuse me, it's kind of cool to see that the sect that was there. They built this self-sufficing town, if you will, places to live, sleep. There's a scribe's room where they sat and they copied the scriptures, storage area, a swimming area, a bath area. And for whatever the reason, this group, we think of how strict the Pharisees and the Sadducees were in regards to the law. These guys thought they were too liberal. So they went out into the desert and created this thing, and they were copying the scriptures, and then they feared that they were going to lose, something was going to happen, so they placed them in these pots and hid them in 4 caves. So there you see 3 of them. There's one there, one up there, one there, and then we couldn't see the other one. It's behind this mountain here. And there's been some talk this morning about the Dead Sea area coming back to life. And Isaiah 35, where'd it go? Isaiah 35 verses 1 and 2 says, "The wilderness and the wasteland shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose, and it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice, even with joy and singing." And you'll see that green area back there. That is lush green grass or crops. I'm not sure which. We were far enough away. But before it looked like this. And they've developed an irrigational system, and the desert is coming back to life. And it's like another one of those mind blown. So we tour that area, and we go, of course, to have lunch there in their cafeteria, and then a gift shop. You have to have the gift shop. So we're walking around there, and I'm looking, and I'm going, that guy looks familiar. That looks like Dave Wharton from our state office in Ohio. So I kind of walk around, get on the other side, and I look, and I went, no, it's not Dave. So I leave the gift shop, and I walk down the ramp, and there sitting on the bench is Dave Wharton. What are you doing here? And he is with this group from Violet Baptist Church in Pinkerton, down by Columbus. And so I'm over telling our group, I just ran into some people from Ohio. I said, and I heard there was another group here. And about that time, Dwayne Floro walks up. So we got a photo op there. He posted that picture on Facebook. He says, be careful where you go. You never know who's going to turn up. Truth. So we load up from there and we head for the Dead Sea. The lowest point on earth, 1,410 feet plus below sea level. And they've always told us how smooth the Dead Sea is. Somebody lied to me. Our daughter has a friend who grew up in Palestine, and she was telling, Heather was telling her about this, and she said, Dead Sea isn't rough. Look at these pictures. And she showed Heather pictures. She said, yeah, but let me show you mine. She said, I have never seen that before. So, again, bucket list. I'm in the Dead Sea. I'm going to get in it. And so a couple of us changed into our bathing suits and made our way down. And let me tell you, that's salty, but it's slippery too. You better have good footing when you go in there. So there's my friend Alan, and we're standing there, and of course everybody else is up on shore, and they said, hey, turn around so we can get a picture. My comment was, the last time I turned my back on the ocean, a wave knocked me down. Prophecy fulfilled. Yeah. That was ugly. So I said, that's it. I've had it. I'm leaving. But apparently, it impressed God because he sent down a ray from, I was going to put that one with the pigeon. But I thought, man, maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. So I got baptized in the Jordan, almost got baptized in the Dead Sea, and then to even things out, I almost fell in a mud hole a day or two later. So Monday, there's a shepherd with sheep or goats, I can't really tell. And again, all those rocks. I mean, I can't get past that. So we went to Bethlehem then, and that's the Church of the Nativity, is aerial view. Our guide airdropped these pictures to us. The place is huge. It's got areas in it for the Catholics and the Orthodox and the Armenians and the Protestants. All have separate areas to worship in. And again, this was built during the Crusades. And the building, is big. And you'll notice the door. It's low. You have to humble yourself to enter into the Church of the Nativity. And then once you get in, it opens up, even higher than what this room is here. There's a shot of Bethlehem at night at the Christmas season. So Monday was our day off. And it rained cats and dogs. It did. 13 of us made a trip to the Holocaust Museum. They don't allow photography inside. But it's a huge complex that keeps getting bigger. We spent 2 hours in this building alone, and we saw most of it, but you could spend 3 days at the museum to see the outside events and displays and whatnot. Several countries are represented, all the countries that have been involved over the years, and it's amazing how all these different countries allowed not only the Jews, but even the Roma, the gypsies, to be shipped off to these camps and to be executed. And this is inscribed on the wall as you exit. Has the like of this happened in your days, or in the days of your fathers? Tell your children about it, and let your children tell theirs and their children, the next generation, from Joel 2, verse 3. One of the things that we noticed while we were in there, here come all these soldiers in. And it's part of their basic training. They take them through the Holocaust Museum. Here's what you're fighting for. Don't ever forget. And they've got the room of names, and right at the end of the museum. In the room of names, you walk in and it's a circular room, and there's this big cone that goes up into the ceiling, and there's pictures of people Jewish people that were killed in the Holocaust. All these pictures up there. And then when you look down, there's a railing, and the cone goes down with water at the bottom, and it's symmetrical. It's as deep as it is tall. And then the outside walls of this building is probably as large as this. There's shelves, floor to ceiling, all the way around with volume after volume after volume of names of Jewish people that lost their lives. It's very moving. Saw quite a few people as we watched through the museum, and there was people there giving their story on video. People watching it, you couldn't help but to shed a tear. So Monday night we had a special treat. We got to go to King David's Citadel for a night spectacular light show. King David Citadel, our guy said, I don't know why they called it King David Citadel. It was built long after King David was dead. But nonetheless, it's there, and it's the night spectacular. Lasts 45 minutes. And if you ever watch the Gaither concerts from Israel, this is where their concert was. And for 45 minutes, it's lights and music. Not a word is spoken. And that whole area, as far as you can see to the left and to the right, the history of Israel is displayed in lights. And it's very fast moving. It covers all the different cultures that had come in and invaded Israel and it had inhabited it, and it brought it up to the present time. So that was a pretty cool thing. So our final day, Tuesday, January 21st. We go to the Israel Museum, and there they have a scale model of the city of Jerusalem when the temple was there. And that is the temple. There is the Holy of Holies. There's the Eastern Gate. I'll point that out to you here in just a moment. There in Kidron Valley is there. After we walked around that thing is so huge you can't get a good single picture of that one. We went to the Shrine of the Book, which is right next door, and you see this. We're looking at this thing, and what in the world is that thing there? And it's a replica of what they covered the top of a scroll with. And the black wall is black marble, and it's darkness being overshadowed by the light of the Word. Again, they didn't allow photography in there, but it's a circular building, and they've got pieces of the Dead Sea Scroll and other items in there that's pretty interesting. Our group, once again, there in the background from the Mount of Olives is Bethany. We read about that where Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived, and where Jesus would frequently go when he was in Jerusalem. That's in the background. And while we were at the Mount of Olives, we went to the Chapel of the Ascension. And this is supposed to be the spot where Jesus ascended into heaven. And while we were in there, it's got a big dome in there. And it's not real large, the building itself. I think that's a Muslim mosque close by in the same complex, because it actually sits in the Muslim quarter. And that's the building itself. And again, you have to kind of duck to go through the door. But what's cool is this is the spot, they say. That's where Jesus would have been standing when he went up into heaven. And you shall be witness to me in Jerusalem and all of Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Go from this spot into all the world, make disciples. So we move from there and we move on down the road a little piece. There's a view of the a panoramic view, if you will, of the city, and that is the Church of All Nations, I believe it's called. And you see depicted up there, there's God, there's Jesus, the lost and the saved. And it's the place of Gethsemane. And so the church is behind me. Across the valley, that direction is the eastern gate. And you'll notice that the gates are bricked up. And again, this temple was torn down in 70 AD, and whenever they built it, you would have thought they just built a wall. But they built the eastern gates, but they blocked them off because they're still looking for the Messiah to come, and he's going to enter the Holy of Holies by way of the eastern gate. That area between me and the gates is a Jewish cemetery. They're anticipating the coming of the Messiah for the first time. A piece of the Kidron Valley and more of the cemetery. We already know that Jesus is coming back, not for the first time, but to call his church home. So there's Gethsemane. Some of those olive trees, they say, date back to the time of Jesus. Those are some old trees. Inside, of course, they have the Church of Gethsemane, and that picture on your right is supposed to be the rock. Some more pictures from the Mount of Olives. And then we went to the Garden Tomb. My eyes were opened up when we were there. It's one of those you have to go to. That was our guide. What was the little Mennonite pastor's name that served at the chapel there years ago?
Ross.
Okay. This guy's doing the same thing that Ross did. So that is what Golgotha looks like today. Again, we're in the we're in the Muslim quarter, Palestinian quarter. There is the wall to a Muslim cemetery. A Palestinian bus company has their parking lot down there. So I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, all right, how'd they get those crosses up there on the top of that hill? So Dwayne says, that's a good question. Let's ask it. So we ask, and we learned that this is the picture from years gone by. There's the nose, two eyes. Major highway runs in front of it where those buses are parked now. There's a wall up there still. But the crosses weren't taken up there, they said. The crosses were brought down here next to the road because the Romans wanted people to see who was crucified, to warn them off, you don't want to violate our laws. And I said, well, that kind of shoots some of the hymns we've been singing all my life. Up Calvary's Mountain, I'm going, I'm going to have a hard time singing that from now on. But they said 4 years ago the nose of the skull fell off, so it's kind of hard to see it. And we went from there, we went down to the Garden Tomb. And there's a photograph of what it looked like when it was first discovered. Again, the thing had to be excavated out, and they found that. And what it looks like today before we had opportunity to go in. And that's a drawing of the inside of the tomb. In this first area, they'd bring the deceased in and they'd prepare the body for burial. And they'd wrap it with the frankincense and myrrh and all that, and then it'd be placed in one of these areas. Tomb would be sealed off, A year or so later, they would come back and they'd go in and they'd clean up. They'd take the bones, put them in a stone coffin, place it on the floor area there someplace to make room for other members of the family that would pass later on. The significance of this is there's no stone caskets in there. That tomb is empty. It was used one time, and it was used for Jesus, and he's not there. So we moved from there, and we moved up a little further in the complex, and we had our communion service. Again, it was a cold day. It snowed that morning on us. And those are marble benches. You didn't fall asleep during that service. But we gathered there and shared the elements, and Dwayne read scripture and took the other set of elements. And then we boarded on our bus and we headed towards the airport. We were going to go through Emmaus and a couple other places, but it just rained so hard that they said there's no point in us going there because you're not going to be able to see anything anyhow because it was coming dark. But our final meal, our last supper, if you will, was in a Palestinian restaurant. And all the local cuisine, if you will. I have no idea what some of that stuff is. Most of it was good. But I was honored to ask to give the blessing over the meal before they brought out the kebabs. Those were really good. By the way, those French fries aren't on my plate. Yeah, they were. But it was a great meal. We loaded up on the bus, or before we loaded up on the bus, we had time. So we sat and reminisced about the trip, talked with Robbie, had questions for him, and shared thoughts. I have to share this real quick. Oh, it didn't turn. Darn it. When we were, there he is, the guy sitting in the background. This guy here. Yeah. North Carolina, slow talking. And when we were in Jordan at the baptismal site in the gift shop, his wife wanted to buy this nativity scene. And he's going, that's an awful lot of money. But she really wanted it. And he said, you know, as long as we're going to be on the plane, if you get me a chunk of wood, I'll just carve it and I'll have it done by the time we get home. Yeah, well, a couple of minutes later, he was going back inside to buy a nativity scene. So from there, we went to the airport and waited to fly home. We had about a 5-hour wait before we got on the plane, but we enjoyed each other's companies. But the one thing they kept saying to us as I closed was pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Actually, pray for the peace of Israel. Psalm 102:6 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. This was an opportunity of a lifetime. If you ever get the opportunity to go, I told Judy, I almost feel like I need to go back to find out what I missed the first time. But my hope is, my plan is, that as I look at these pictures and as I study the scriptures, I can apply that to what I've learned and what I saw there, and hopefully from time to time be able to share it with you. Thanks for your time and your attention. I appreciate it, and if you got questions, I can try to answer them, but if not, whatever.